Hello everyone, and welcome to today's event, live from the studio with Karen Zalamea. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Fawn Ibarra, and I am the Public Programs and Residency Coordinator here at Griffin Art Projects. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that our work takes place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Stolo nations, to whom we're deeply grateful. As well, we would like to thank the BC Arts Council for their support of the residency program. A few housekeeping notes before today's presentation. If you would like to see live captions displayed for today's presentations, you can enable this by selecting the CC Live Transcription button at the bottom of your screen. Lastly, I'll mention that there will also be a chance at the end of today's presentations for audience questions. So if at any point throughout the presentation you have a question for our presenter, feel free to type it in the Q&A dialog box. Without further ado, I'll introduce Karen Zalamea. Karen is a Filipino-Canadian artist, educator, and cultural worker based in Vancouver, Canada. The unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Zalamea's interdisciplinary practice is rooted in photography and critically considers methodologies, materialities, and modes of presentation. Her research centers on the camera-mediated relationship between body and space, as well as the material and representational potential of the photographic surface. Her work has expanded to use photography as a means to think through and encounter broader issues of identity, memory, and uncertainty. Zalamea's projects have received support from the Canada Council for the Arts, British Columbia Arts Council, and Quebec Arts Council, and she has carried out residencies in the Philippines, Iceland, and Canada. Her work has been presented in solo and group exhibitions and as public projects across Canada and internationally. In 2020, Zalamea released her limited edition artist book, They Are Lost as Soon as They Are Made. Zalamea holds an MFA from Concordia University in Montreal and a BFA from Emily Carr University, Art of Design, here in Vancouver. Okay, take it away, Karen.
Great, thank you so much, Faune. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, great. So let me just share my screen. Great, and you can see that?
Yes, we see it.
Yeah, okay, perfect, thanks. So thank you, Faune, for that introduction. And I'd also like to thank the entire team at Griffin Art Projects for facilitating this event and also for supporting this residency. It's been a real gift to have the time and space to think through new work and to produce new work. And I'd also like to thank everyone for joining in on Zoom today. I can't see you, but I know you're there. So let me just get my notes here. So before I'm going to dive into what I've been making here at the studio, I wanted to touch on a couple of my previous projects to give some background on my artistic practice and hopefully draw some connections in how I'm thinking through photography and thinking through various methodologies, ways of working with material, etc. So I'll talk for roughly 30 minutes or so, and then afterwards I'd be happy to open it up to questions or comments, or if you'd like to say hello in the chat. So I will come back to this image, but I'll start with a previous project. This is a series called They Are Lost as Soon as They Are Made, which actually began during another residency back in 2015 in Iceland. And for that residency, I built an analog 4x5 film camera and made lenses by freezing local water samples in specially fabricated biconvex lens molds. And together with the camera and the ice lenses, I photographed the landscape. So this began as an experiment with the camera and its optics. and expanded into thinking about the possibilities of capturing the natural landscape with elements of nature itself. Can the landscape reveal and render its own photographic image? What is gained and what is lost through this optical transmission? Because of course, ice has very different properties than a conventional glass lens. And ultimately, how does the landscape see itself through this process? So as you can see, the resulting images are not conventional representations of space in consideration of the larger historical legacy of landscape photography and its depictions of the picturesque. And it's certainly not what you would expect of Iceland's awe-inspiring landscapes of fire and ice. But together as a whole, so there were 80 photographs produced in total, we see impressions of sky and sea, hints of horizon, vegetation, and ultimately photos that present impressions of being in atmosphere and being in weather. And this was its most recent exhibition, in a group exhibition this past fall and winter, with the 80 photographs displayed together as a singular grid. So I'm thinking about photography as a mode of encounter, embracing uncertainty and variable photographic results. Because during this process, I wasn't sure if anything would be reported. And at the same time, I'm consciously thinking through the histories and colonial legacies and ideologies that have been shaped with and by the photographic medium. And this project, whether in its final iteration, as an artist book in late 2020. And I just wanted to touch on a couple of other location-based projects. One is called Weathering and another is called Scene. And the images for both of these projects were taken during a road trip through the American West. And the work was deployed through a range of different photographic responses, from traditional silver gelatin prints to these, which are laser cut inkjet prints on silk. And this is the way that they were displayed during a solo exhibition at the Burrard's Art Foundation in 2018. And to me, the images function as topographic skins that shift and drape, fold and layer and undulate. I consider them to be soft photographs that conform and respond to the support structures on which they are shown. And this type of malleability has informed my work since, and it's something that I'm continuing to think about, especially in the work that I'm making here in the studio right now.
Hi, Karen. Your mic is rubbing off against something.
Oh, okay.
I think perhaps when you are reading, the pages are rubbing against the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, let me just move where I have my paper. Can you hear me better right now?
Yeah, there's no ambient sound now. Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. Thanks for jumping in.
For sure.
Yeah, okay. And this was the second part of the project that was presented at BAF, which is called Scene. And it was a title that I selected because of the homophone scene, S-C-E-N-E, and the word scene, S-E-E-N, and I loved that confusion between those two words. And in this work, I was incorporating more collage techniques, this way of manipulating the photographic material. So collage techniques like cutting and folding and layering and pinning and nailing the photographs directly onto the wall. And these techniques I saw as ways of eliminating specific geographic references or spatial context. So in a way of very intentionally instilling a sense of dislocation and of ungrounding. So what remains are these enigmatic surfaces that together, in my mind, poetically construct other spaces and other vistas. Similar to the ice photos, they play to the learned ways in which we visually, physically, and metaphorically situate ourselves in relation to spatial representations. And I wanted to purposely remove any sort of stabilizing cues like horizon lines or recognizable landmarks, and in a way propose other geographies and alternate modes of recording and of reading space. So after completing those bodies of work, so this was around 2019, I was thinking about trying to find a way to travel to the Philippines, which is my parents' homeland. And just for some background, I am second generation Canadian born, and I had only traveled to the Philippines twice prior in family trips. And the last time was in 1999. And so at the invitation of the mobile curatorial group, Load na Dito, I carried out a self-directed residency in February 2020. And so during the entire month of February, I lived in my ancestral house in Quezon City, which is the house that my mother grew up in and which still remains in our family. And so this is a photo from that house. I was weary of not romanticizing this homecoming, but I was more curious about spending time in the house. And particularly, I was curious about the marble details that could be found throughout this humble working class home. Marble that could be found on the steps of the staircase and the floor tiles on the main floor. And I later learned that they were brought to the house by my great-grandfather, who was originally from Romblon, which is located in the center of the country and known for its marble industry. And this brings us to this current body of work, ongoing, that I call Sunken Garden. And this is the first piece in the series. And so to make it, I photographed each of the marble steps in the staircase from above. And then I digitally merged them together to form one monumental photograph. It's actually behind me right now as I speak. And in that digital merging, the veining and the texture of the marble is connected together. And I see this gesture as an imagined restoration of the extracted stone to the land. And so to give you an idea of what that means to digitally merge this image, basically there are 14 steps in the staircase. And so if you can see my cursor, this would be one step. And it's basically like forcing and forging a puzzle together and then filling in any gaps by sampling other areas of the photo. And this is an installation view from a recent group exhibition that the work was in at the Art Gallery of Grand Prairie, an exhibition called Tsleil-Waututh, which was guest curated by Crudel Rosario. And the second image that accompanies the marble banner, and so I should take a step back and say that the marble image is printed on banner, like a exterior sort of tarp material with grommets all along the edges. And I was interested in the fact that it could easily be rolled up or folded, that it's a commercially available material, and was something that I actually saw quite a bit when I was in the Philippines. This tarp or banner material was used for a lot of commercial signage as well. So wanting to use something accessible like that, and that can also perhaps even speak to shelter as well. And so after that self-directed residency, I returned to Vancouver in early March 2020, but it was my plan at some point to return to the Philippines. I had run out of time and I had really wanted to travel to Romblon to perhaps photograph some quarries there. But then of course, I returned home in March 2020 and the global pandemic began. So kind of upended any sort of international travel plans. But I wanted to instead, rather than putting the project on hold, think about what is possible with this sense of physical distance, this trans-Pacific distance, and what are the possibilities of that restriction. And it's been really generative in thinking about constructed images. So both, the marble piece that is constructing one monumental piece of stone, and this is also a constructed image here of a marble quarry that combines together numerous images that have been sourced online. So through Google Maps or travel photos that others have posted on social media and on travel blogs. And it's a sort of an imagined quarry, a speculative sort of photographic assemblage that gleans the internet for a remote taste of what I might have found had I been able to physically go there. And if you look closely, there are hints within the photograph where there are echoes of certain structures that repeat over and over again. So it does hint towards its constructedness. And also prior to leaving the Philippines, so in the end of February 2020, I knew that I wanted to also try to bring a piece of marble back with me. And so I had a local mason at a cemetery marker or tombstone establishment next to a cemetery hand engrave this phrase that I wanted to incorporate: every surface is a shrine. And I had not anticipated that he would actually paint the letters in. So I brought this stone back with me to Vancouver, and I want to continue to work into the surface and actually scrape off, in this performative gesture, scrape off the paint to reveal again the marble surface underneath it. And so what I've begun is an experiment using contact microphones or piezo microphones that can be attached to the surface of the stone and can record the audio of the surface vibrations while I repeat the scratching gesture. So I've done some tests and it's in process right now, but I do see this eventually will be an audio experience. So back to the house, which I did view as an archive with many intergenerational personal items that were unmoved. And I started to find family photos throughout the house. Some were gathered in shoeboxes, others were tucked in the back of drawers, some were in old books like these, or in pockets or purses in the back of closets. And I grew pretty concerned that they were not being preserved, or at the very least consolidated and brought together. And also the exposure to heat and humidity were not ideal conditions for preservation. So I started to question, who do these photos belong to? And who are they for? And to me, the answer is one and the same. They belong to and are for the family. And I kind of grappled with it for a bit of, whether or not they should remain in the house, or if I should try to rescue them and try to conserve them. And so with my mother's blessing, I did take them back to Vancouver with me with plans to scan them. And I've since transferred them to archival sleeves and binders. And I feel an incredible sense of responsibility having them in my safekeeping. A lot of these photos date back to 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And I also knew that I wanted to incorporate these photos into my work because I see them very much as an extension of the ancestral house and as rich sources of intergenerational memory and knowledge. And they are really fascinating as photographic material, a lot of them fading over time, have scratches, marks, fingerprints, folds, tears, surface aberrations of all sorts and in various states of decay, revealing the ways in which they've been handled. This one, as you can see, was subject to perhaps someone's school project or collage. And I've also been grappling with what to include in this work because I'm conscious of not wanting to reveal too much or not over extracting from a personal archive and wanting to respect the privacy of family members, those who are both alive and those who have since passed. And it's been a bit of a self-negotiation in how to resolve this and walk that fine line between exposure and concealment. But I had known for a couple of years now, I've been thinking about finding ways to make photographic ropes. And so this is the process that I've begun. So just to explain how I've gone about this, I have scanned the photos and then enlarged them and printed them much bigger. Majority of them are around 24 inches wide by 30 to 35 inches high, and printed them on a canvas material. And then on the back side, they've been measured into 1/4 inch strips and cut. And then following an 8-strand braiding pattern, so I'd remove 8 strands from one end of the photograph. They're woven around a pre-existing nylon rope as the core for stability and body. So they're being wrapped and braided around the rope. And as those 8 strands come to an end, an additional 8 more strands are glued to continue weaving along the 50-foot rope. I should mention these are not my hands. These are the hands of someone who's been assisting me here in the studio, Carl Hiepel, who has been really helpful and has incredible knowledge and skill set since his own artistic practice incorporates a lot of weaving techniques. And so just for a sneak peek in how this is coming about in the studio, we've been using some of the table supports for tension while they're being woven. And it's a pretty slow and labor-intensive process of traversing this length of the rope, and it starts to gather and puddle on the floor like so. So we have 2 simultaneous rope making stations here in the studio. And then I'll just show you some of them as they're in process. And so upon closer inspection, you can see hints of foliage and of clothing, skin tone. At some points you can see an eye or a finger. So I'm still thinking, the work is pretty fresh, and I'm still thinking through the language or how to articulate what exactly is happening here. I see it as a melding together of bodies and spaces and personal narratives over time. The weaving structure itself visually also brings the images into the digital in these measured units that come together and create these coils. And in thinking about presentation and malleability, similar to the marble banner or the prints on silk. I'm interested in the ways in which the presentation of these photographic ropes can shift. They can be stretched or hung or tied in knots. And I like the idea of being able to coil it and carry an archive with me. So these are just some details. So ultimately, I'm starting to see this work as a form of kin work, as forms of care, and as a way of thinking through how to be with and relate to and correspond with a personal archive. And I think I'll leave it there. And so I welcome any questions about the process or previous works.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Karen. It was very interesting to hear about your practice and all you have been doing at Griffin. We have a question in the Q&A already. You can read it, but I can read it to you as well.
I'd be happy to read it out loud.
Okay.
Yeah, it's from Alyssa. Hi, Alyssa. Thanks for tuning in. What is the reaction of your family to your exploration of the personal or the family personal archive? Thank you. Yes, I was recently talking to my mother about this and kind of giving her a heads up that this was happening. And she seemed pretty excited and was curious to see how this was taking shape. And so, yeah, I think there's just a lot of curiosity around it. I don't think that there's a lot that's revealed in the actual form that they're taking now as photographic ropes too. So I'm interested in the way that this is, functioning between visibility and invisibility, and in, walking that line between exposure and concealment, and there's a lot that's being shifted, and there's a bit of a metamorphosis here in the weaving, and so the content remains the same. It's still there, but it's just reorganized.
There's another question in the Q&A. I'll read it to you.
Sure.
And it says, thanks for this, Karen. I have a question about the large marble photo and smaller quarry photo. It's interesting to me that you kind of inverted the macro and the micro. Marble step render monumental compared to the landscape photo much smaller. Was that intentional, or was that it just a consequence of using possibly low-res online images as source material?
Yeah, let me just actually, am I able to bring that up? There we go. Thank you, Adrian, for tuning in and for your question. Yeah, so we are dealing with very vastly different presentation scales. And I think, yeah, logistically and practically, because a lot of the images for the quarry itself was being sourced online, there are many limitations there. So that was a part of it. And I really wanted the marble image itself to be at this monumental scale because of this gesture of returning it to the land and its scale in relation to you as you're viewing it as if you're entering a landscape. It's actually curious when you put it on the floor, and my instinct has been like wanting to walk on it since it is sort of like the staircase flattened out and returned to the land. That it is pretty an immersive experience of being in that constructed space. And so, yeah, so the quarry itself, I think is much smaller scale, just in response to where I was getting the images from. And of course, I was able realistically to start with much higher res images because I photographed the marble steps myself. And I like how they're kind of an odd pairing of this really vastly large, monument and this much smaller, intimate visit to a quarry that you have to get much closer into it for legibility.
Wow, that's very interesting. We have another question. This one is by your studio mate, Parvin.
Yeah.
Parvin says, "Hello, Karen. I am interested in making rope. And how does rope operate within your conceptual frame and poetic language? How strategies of cutting and gluing serve your intention? Thanks."
Yeah. I'm not sure. I think that's what I'm trying to build language around right now. Instinctually, it was just something that I wanted to try. I was thinking about it quite a bit when I was preparing the exhibition at the Burrard Arts Foundation. And I just ran out of time and I couldn't really resolve at that time what images I wanted to use. And so when I come to a project, I'm not so much thinking that I want to make rope. It's more that I want to work with this pre-existing material and what are the ways in which I can incorporate like a desire towards malleability, that I can incorporate ways of maintaining, people's privacy and not revealing too much of the archive and showing all the images as they are. As you notice, like during my presentation, I didn't really show didn't show the images in their unhindered state, right? So to me, I see it as an interesting strategy of working with the archive as material. And yeah, I think I'm still trying to find ways of articulating why rope.
And I have a question for you too that is related to Parvin's question, because earlier in the presentation you were talking about speculative photography and how with the quarry, when you built the quarry, you had many images sourced from the internet to form a space, to construct a space. So I was wondering, when you come to your family archive, what will be the role of a speculative photography in there?
That's a great question. I mean, it all is very speculative in the way that I come to it in piecing together, identifying who's who, trying to identify what year things might be happening in, trying to identify locations, and trying to glean whatever narrative you can from people's facial expressions or how they're dressed, if it's a formal occasion. And so there are always forms of speculation and invention in thinking about the narratives that are being represented in these still photos. And yes, I could maybe get some information if there's some sort of inscription on the back of a photo, or if somebody else within the family can recall what was happening. But with much older photos, like 1950s and 60s, those details get lost. And so we're always inserting assumptions in the ways that we're reading these images, and especially when they are depictions of people who are close to you or people you have heard about.
Yeah, there's another question about the rope. So Adrienne asks, do you think of the rope as deconstructed photography? Will it be too, quote unquote, on the nose to think of photos as a thing that binds us as subjects, relationships between photographer, photograph, and audience, and rope as a literal representation of that?
Yeah, on the nose. Well, I am thinking of it like quite literally as a way of merging together all of these disparate materials into this one combined assemblage, right? Because I'm constructing a way of bringing not only the photos, but the subject matter, the people and the places and the narratives and all of the details that those photos contain. And also like the memory of the surface of the photos and like the scratches and the fingerprints that are found on there. So I do see that as a way of like, of it being bound all together. But relationships between photographer, photograph, and audience. I'm not sure. I feel like, yeah, maybe that should be part of a larger conversation, and something to think about.
And we have a question that is just very open right now. And they ask, what is next for you?
Oh. You know, when I pack up at the end of the month, I might take a little break because it's been pretty intense. And I do have a couple invitations that are coming up. So potentially some workshops in the fall, photography workshops. And then I'm also part of a 3-person exhibition early next year. So there are things coming up that I'm gearing up for and thinking about like what materials to present.
Thank you. There's another question by an anonymous attendee, and they ask, it seems that you work to derail the expectations of the photographic landscape in previous work, and now seem to be working at doing the same with your family photos. Are you able to articulate why you seem to be working against these photographic traditions? On a side note, the 2 robes remind me of a double helix or a DNA with the weaving together of family through time.
Yeah, definitely something I was thinking about. If you also want to talk about different scales, that's another way of thinking about it too. Yeah, derailing expectations. It's always been my impulse not to embrace, I guess, quote unquote, straight photography. Although I have a deep love for, you know, this very seductive process of taking a highly detailed, high res, you know, large format photo and printing it as is with perfect color correction and contrast. And I appreciate the technical finesse it takes to execute something like that. But I don't really know if that is enough for me. And so I'm more interested in the material handling and in working with the stuff of photography and getting my hands in it and seeing what is possible with, you know, working with photos like in real life, like not as projections or not as digital material, but as like something that is printed on different substrates and can be worked further. So it's not only a surface that shows a representation, but is also physically something that exists in the world that takes up shape and volume, and that its manipulation can be a further conversation with what is being like optically represented in the photo, if that makes sense.
Thank you for your answer. There doesn't seem to be any other question, but I'll ask you, is there anything you would like to add?
Well, these are great questions. So thank you everyone for engaging and for your curiosity. As you can tell, I'm still very much in the early stages of trying to like build a language around ropes. Why ropes? What does this process mean? And right now it's pretty fresh and just for me, it's very much also like an embodied process of of being within this very ritualistic pattern and of a repeated gesture over and over, and a way of like moving my hands through the archive too. And I'm literally moving my hands through every centimeter of every photograph in this very slow and, you know, meditative and laborious way. And so it's a way of like really intimately getting to know it in a way that I might not have known it had I just, you know, kept it in an album. And so I think there's really incredible potential there to think about our relationship to images and how we can activate archives and have it very present in our lives and revisit them over and over again. And yeah, so I'll see as the process continues. Hopefully I'll find more language to give it shape. And I'm imagining this as like much larger accumulations of rope, and I think it'll be like a really, really enriching experience just to be surrounded by this material in that form.
I don't see any other questions from the audience, so I'll ask you the last question. You've been talking a lot about gestures, compositing images, or like braiding the ropes. So I wonder, what will be your next gesture?
Well, I think right now it's going to be the scratching. So the scratching on the marble surface and seeing how even maybe potentially that can be musical. That's how I'm starting to think of it. I wish I had a sample that I could play right now, but it's really, really in early stages. And I was skeptical as to whether the marble itself would be resonant enough to register any sort of sound with the contact microphones, but it does work. And it has more of like a higher pitched clanging sound, almost like a gong. So with every sort of scratching stroke, it becomes like a rhythmic beat. And so in recording this scratching and yes, this musically playing a piece of marble, this will be my next gesture for sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for joining as well. This has been really great to talk through these works.
Yes. Okay, and before we go, I just gotta thank you again, everyone, for joining us today for Live from the Studio with Karen Zalamea. Please join us for our next Live from the Studio with Parvin Paivandi. I'll put the link on the box to register for that event. And if you would like to know more about Griffin and stay in touch, you can subscribe to our newsletter at the bottom of our website, which I will put on the description box as well. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Karen, once more.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.